The mansion stood as a relic of opulence and decay, a grand structure built in the 1920s by Dr. Charles Montgomery. With its towering columns and intricate stonework, it exuded an eerie charm that drew in the unsuspecting. The mansion's dark and violent history seemed to permeate its very walls, whispering secrets to those who dared to enter. We moved into the Montgomery Mansion on a bright autumn day, blissfully unaware of the horrors that awaited us. My name is Ben Harmon, and my family was desperate for a fresh start. My wife Vivian and I had been through a rough patch, and our daughter Violet was struggling to find her place in the world. We hoped the move would bring us closer together, heal our wounds. The real estate agent, a chipper woman named Marcy, gave us a brief history of the house as we toured its grand halls. She glossed over the darker parts, but there was no hiding the mansion's sinister past. It was a place where dreams had died and nightmares had taken root. Yet, we were drawn to it, entranced by its beauty and mystery. Our first night in the mansion was uneventful. We unpacked our belongings, trying to settle into our new life. The house was eerily quiet, its vast rooms swallowing up the sounds of our movements. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The shadows seemed to move, and the air felt heavy with a presence I couldn't explain. The next morning, I decided to explore the basement, a sprawling labyrinth of rooms and corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. It was there that I first felt the true weight of the mansion's history. The walls were lined with old medical equipment, remnants of Dr. Montgomery's experiments. A chill ran down my spine as I imagined the horrors that had taken place in that very room. Vivian, always the skeptic, dismissed my concerns. She was determined to make the best of our new home, focusing on renovating and decorating. But Violet was different. She sensed the darkness too. She spent hours exploring the house, fascinated by its secrets. It wasn't long before she started seeing things, ghostly apparitions that seemed all too real. The first time she saw Tate Langdon, she was in the basement. He appeared out of nowhere, a troubled teenager with a haunted look in his eyes. He seemed friendly enough at first, but there was something off about him. Violet was drawn to him, intrigued by his mysterious aura. She didn't realize that he was one of the mansion's many victims, a ghost trapped in a cycle of violence and despair. As the days turned into weeks, the mansion's influence grew stronger. Strange things began to happen. Objects moved on their own, whispers echoed through the halls, and doors slammed shut without warning. We tried to ignore it, to rationalize it away, but the truth was undeniable. The mansion was alive, feeding off our fears and anxieties. One night, as we sat down for dinner, the power went out. The darkness enveloped us, and a cold wind blew through the house. We huddled together, our breaths visible in the frigid air. It was then that we heard it, the faint cry of a baby coming from the basement. It was a sound that chilled us to the bone, a reminder of the mansion's tragic past. The next morning, we found a trail of blood leading from the basement to the living room. It was as if the house was trying to tell us something, to show us the horrors that had taken place within its walls. We were living in a nightmare, and there was no escaping it. The cry of the baby haunted us all night. Violet, who had always been brave, was now shaken. She refused to go down to the basement, and even Vivian, the eternal skeptic, seemed unnerved. I knew we needed to understand what had happened in the house if we had any hope of surviving its horrors. Determined to uncover the mansion's secrets, I spent hours in the local library, combing through old newspapers and historical records. The more I read, the more I realized how deeply the darkness of the Montgomery Mansion ran. It wasn't just the tragic death of Dr. Montgomery's infant son, Thaddeus, or the gruesome experiments that followed. The house had a legacy of violence that stretched back decades. Every family that had lived there had met a tragic end. Suicides, murders, mysterious disappearances, each more horrifying than the last. The mansion seemed to devour those who dared to enter, trapping their souls within its walls. The more I learned, the more hopeless our situation seemed. Back at the mansion, strange occurrences became more frequent. Vivian's renovation projects were constantly interrupted by inexplicable events. Tools disappearing, walls bleeding, eerie music playing from unseen sources. Violet's encounters with Tate grew more intense. He told her about the house's history, about the people who had died there and the malevolent spirits that still lingered. Violet was fascinated by Tate, despite his dark past. She spent more and more time with him, often disappearing for hours. When I confronted her, she became defensive, insisting that Tate was just misunderstood. But I could see the toll it was taking on her. She was becoming paler, more withdrawn, as if the house was slowly draining her life force. One evening, I discovered an old photograph album hidden in the attic. It contained pictures of the Montgomery family and other former residents. As I flipped through the pages, I felt a chill run down my spine. The faces in the photos seemed to stare back at me with an unsettling intensity, their eyes filled with sorrow and fear. Then I found it, a photograph of Dr. Charles Montgomery and his wife Nora, holding their baby boy, Thaddeus. There was something deeply unsettling about the image. The baby's eyes were black, soulless, as if he had already been touched by the evil that permeated the house. Vivian, sensing my unease, tried to comfort me. "It's just a house, Ben," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We can't let ourselves be consumed by its past. We have to stay strong for Violet's sake." But it was easier said than done. The house seemed to have a will of its own, manipulating our thoughts and emotions. I could feel its malevolent presence growing stronger, feeding off our fear and despair. One night, as I was going through the photo album again, I heard a whisper in my ear. It was faint, almost inaudible, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Help us," it said. "Free us." I turned around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, save for the shadows dancing on the walls. Desperate for answers, I decided to confront Tate. I found him in the basement, standing by the old medical equipment. His expression was somber, as if he knew why I had come. "You can't save them," he said, his voice low and haunting. "The house won't let you. It's too late." "Why are you here, Tate?" I demanded. "Why are you haunting us?" He looked at me with sad eyes. "I'm trapped," he said simply, "just like all the others. The house feeds on our pain, our anger. It keeps us here, tormented, forever." I felt a surge of anger and helplessness. "There has to be a way to stop this," I insisted. "We can't just give up." Tate shook his head. "The house is too powerful. The only way to escape is to leave. But even then, it might not let you go." As I left the basement, Tate's words echoed in my mind. The house was a prison, and we were its captives. But I couldn't give up. I had to find a way to save my family, even if it meant facing the darkest horrors of the Montgomery Mansion. The weight of the mansion's dark history bore down on us with increasing intensity. Each day, new horrors emerged, weaving themselves into the fabric of our daily lives. Vivian began experiencing vivid nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat, her eyes wide with terror. She refused to speak about them, but I could see the toll they were taking on her. Violet's connection with Tate deepened, much to my dismay. She spent countless hours with him, listening to his stories, drawn into his world of sorrow and despair. She seemed to be slipping away from us, becoming a part of the house's tragic tapestry. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion was watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, felt like a prelude to something far more sinister. I knew we had to find a way to break free from its grip before it consumed us entirely. One evening, I ventured into the attic, hoping to find something, anything that could help us. As I rummaged through dusty boxes and forgotten relics, I stumbled upon an old journal. It belonged to Dr. Charles Montgomery himself, chronicling his descent into madness. The journal detailed his experiments, his obsession with reanimating the dead, and the unspeakable horrors he had inflicted upon his victims. It was clear that the mansion's malevolence had begun with him, and it had only grown stronger over the years. The final entry sent a chill down my spine. "The house demands blood." It feeds on suffering. We are all its prisoners. Armed with this new information, I confronted Vivian and Violet. "We need to leave," I said urgently. "This house is evil. It's feeding on us just like it did with everyone before us." Vivian looked at me with weary eyes. "And go where, Ben? This was supposed to be our fresh start. We can't just run away." "But we can't stay here," I insisted. "The longer we stay, the more powerful it becomes. We have to get out before it's too late." Violet, surprisingly, agreed. "Dad's right," she said quietly. "I've seen things, felt things. We can't stay here any longer." We decided to leave that very night. We packed our bags hastily, the air thick with tension. As we made our way to the front door, the house seemed to come alive. The walls groaned, and a cold wind howled through the corridors. It was as if the mansion knew we were trying to escape and was determined to stop us. Just as we reached the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. We were trapped. Panic set in as we tried to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. The house had us in its clutches, and it wasn't going to let us go without a fight. Suddenly, a shadowy figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was Nora Montgomery, her face twisted in anguish. "You can't leave?" she cried. "We're all trapped here, bound by the house's curse. You must help us break it." "How?" I demanded. "How can we break the curse?" She pointed to the basement. "The source of the house's power is down there. You must destroy it. Only then will we be free." With no other choice, we descended into the basement once more. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. At the center of the room stood an altar, covered in blood-stained cloth and surrounded by twisted symbols. As we approached, the temperature dropped, and a sense of dread washed over us. The house was fighting back, its unseen forces trying to drive us away. But we couldn't turn back now. We had to face whatever horrors awaited us and destroy the source of its power. With trembling hands, I grabbed a sledgehammer from the corner of the room. "Stand back," I said to Vivian and Violet. "This ends now." As I swung the sledgehammer down onto the altar, a blinding light erupted from its center. The walls shook, and a deafening roar filled the air. We were thrown to the ground, and for a moment, it felt like the entire house was collapsing around us. When the light faded, the basement was silent. The altar lay in ruins, its power broken. We had done it. We had destroyed the source of the mansion's evil. But as we made our way back upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. The house was still standing, and its malevolent presence still lingered. We had freed the trapped souls, but we hadn't escaped its grasp. We returned upstairs, the air feeling lighter but still charged with an uneasy tension. The house, though weakened, still held a malevolent grip over us. I could sense it watching, waiting for the next opportunity to strike. The mansion was eerily silent, the oppressive atmosphere momentarily lifted by our destruction of the altar. However, the feeling of dread remained, lurking just beneath the surface. We couldn't let our guard down. We needed to find a way to leave for good. As we regrouped in the living room, Tate appeared, his face a mix of relief and sorrow. "You've done it," he said softly. "You've broken the altar's power, but the house's grip isn't completely gone. There's one final step." "What do we need to do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. Tate looked at us with a grave expression. "You need to confront the house itself. It feeds on the memories and emotions of those who have lived here. You need to bring all those trapped here together and force the house to release them. Only then can you truly escape." We didn't have much time. The house was already beginning to react, its walls shuddering and groaning as if in pain. We had to act quickly. Vivian, Violet, and I spread out, calling to the spirits that haunted the mansion, urging them to gather in the living room. One by one, they appeared. Nora and Charles Montgomery, Moira O'Hara, the tortured souls of the murdered residents, and countless others. Their faces were etched with suffering, but also with a glimmer of hope. They had been waiting for this moment for decades. As the last spirit joined the circle, the house began to tremble violently. It was fighting back, unwilling to relinquish its hold. The temperature dropped, and a fierce wind whipped through the room, but we stood firm, determined to see this through. Tate stepped forward, his voice strong and commanding. "House of Darkness, release these souls. Release us all from your grasp." The spirits echoed his plea, their voices rising in a chorus of desperation and defiance. The house's walls seemed to pulse with energy, as if it were trying to contain the power of their collective will. The air was thick with tension, the room bathed in an otherworldly glow. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from the center of the circle, enveloping the spirits. They began to fade, their forms dissolving into the light. The house let out a final, agonized groan, its grip weakening. I felt a surge of hope. We were winning. But just as the last of the spirits began to disappear, the house made one final attempt to reclaim its power. The ground beneath us cracked open, and a dark, shadowy figure emerged. It was the embodiment of the house's evil, a twisted, nightmarish entity that radiated malice. The figure lunged at us, its eyes burning with hatred. We stood our ground, refusing to let fear consume us. Tate, with a final act of bravery, stepped between us and the entity. "No more," he said firmly. "This ends now." With a shout, he thrust his hands forward, channeling the combined power of the freed spirits. The entity shrieked in rage, its form dissolving into nothingness. The ground sealed itself, the light fading as the house's malevolent presence was finally eradicated. We collapsed to the floor, exhausted but victorious. The spirits were gone, freed from their torment, and the house felt different, lighter, almost peaceful. We had done it. We had broken the curse. As we stood up, I looked at Vivian and Violet. "It's over," I said, my voice filled with relief. "We can leave now." We packed our belongings quickly, not wanting to spend another moment in the house. As we stepped outside, the sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the mansion. It no longer looked threatening. It was just an old, empty house. We drove away, the memories of our ordeal still fresh but tempered by the knowledge that we had survived. The Montgomery Mansion was behind us, its dark legacy finally put to rest. But as we left, I couldn't help but glance back one last time. The house stood silent, its shadows receding in the morning light. We had broken its power, but I knew it would never be forgotten. It was a part of our past, a dark chapter in our lives that we would carry with us always. We left the Montgomery Mansion behind, driving into the dawn with a sense of hard-won freedom. Yet, despite the relief of escape, an unsettling feeling lingered. The house's dark influence had seeped into our lives, and it would take time to heal from the horrors we'd endured. Our first few days away were a blur of exhaustion and tentative hope. We settled into a small rental house on the outskirts of the city, far removed from the mansion's looming presence. It was a modest place, but it felt safe, untainted by the darkness that had haunted us. Vivian and Violet began to show signs of recovery. Vivian's nightmares grew less frequent, and she started smiling again, though the shadows in her eyes had not completely faded. Violet, though quieter and more introspective, seemed to be finding her way back to us. The bond with Tate had left its mark, but she was determined to move forward. One evening, as we sat together in our new living room, Violet spoke up. "Dad, do you think we'll ever be free of what happened in that house?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. The events at the mansion had changed us in ways we couldn't fully understand. "I think it's a part of us now," I said carefully. "But it doesn't have to define us. We survived, and that's what matters." Vivian nodded in agreement. "We'll get through this together. We're stronger than the house and its ghosts." Despite our resolve, the past had a way of creeping back. Strange occurrences began to happen in our new home. Small things at first. Objects moved on their own, and we heard faint whispers in the night. It was as if the mansion's evil was trying to reach us, even from afar. One night, I awoke to find Violet standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes wide and terrified. "Dad, it's here," she whispered. "I saw him. I saw Tate." My heart sank. The thought of the house's influence following us was almost too much to bear. I pulled Violet into a hug, trying to reassure her. "It's just a bad dream, sweetie. We're safe here." But I knew it wasn't just a dream. The mansion's dark energy had imprinted itself on us, and we would have to find a way to cleanse ourselves of it. I decided to seek help, reaching out to a local paranormal expert, a woman named Sarah who came highly recommended. Sarah arrived the next day, her presence calm and reassuring. She listened to our story with a sympathetic ear, nodding as we described our experiences. "The house's energy is strong," she said thoughtfully, "but it can be purged. It will take time and effort, but it can be done." She performed a cleansing ritual, burning sage and chanting prayers in every room. She taught us how to protect ourselves from negative energies, using crystals and protective symbols. It was a long and arduous process, but gradually, the strange occurrences lessened, and the whispers faded. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. The memories of the mansion remained, but they no longer held the same power over us. We began to rebuild our lives, finding strength in each other, and the knowledge that we had survived something truly terrifying. One afternoon, as we sat together in the backyard, basking in the warmth of the sun, Vivian turned to me. "Do you think we'll ever be completely free of it?" she asked quietly. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Maybe not completely," I admitted, "but we've broken its hold. We've faced our fears and come out the other side. That's something to be proud of." Violet smiled, her eyes bright with determination. "We're stronger now," she said firmly, "and we'll keep getting stronger." The Montgomery Mansion was behind us, its dark legacy a distant shadow. We had faced its horrors and emerged victorious, and while the past would always be a part of us, it no longer defined us. We were free to create a new future, one filled with hope and possibility. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over our new home, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We had survived the darkness and found the light. The mansion's haunting influence had been broken, and we were ready to move forward, together. The end of one nightmare was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter of healing, strength, and hope. And in that moment, I knew we would be okay. The horrors of the past were behind us, and the future was ours to shape.